The morning of the dog showcase felt different from the start. For Elena, most days had a certain rhythm to them. A quiet, careful rhythm she had built with Axel, her German shepherd, by her side. But today the rhythm was off. The sun was too bright. The air felt charged, like before a storm. She watched Axel as he finished his breakfast. He was a big dog with a dark saddle of fur and intelligent, watchful eyes. He wasn't just a pet. He was her anchor. In the stillness of her small house, he was the reason the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. He was the quiet presence that made the bad memories stay where they belonged. In the past, the idea to go to the county dog showcase had seemed simple a week ago. Her neighbor, a kind older woman, had mentioned it. "It's not just for fancy breeds," she had said, patting Ilana's arm. "They have a class for regular companion dogs. It might be nice for you both to get out." The word nice had stuck in Elena's mind. She missed nice. She missed normal. So she filled out the online form for the canine companions class before she could talk herself out of it. Now, standing in her kitchen, she felt a tightness in her chest. Crowds were a problem. Sudden noises were a problem. The chaotic, happy buzz of a public event was a minefield. She took a slow breath, the way her therapist had taught her. She looked at Axel. He was sitting by the door, his leash in his mouth, his tail giving a single, solid thump against the floor. He was ready. For him, she could try. The parking lot of the county fairgrounds was packed. The moment she opened her car door, the wave of sound hit her. Barking, laughter, a blaring loudspeaker, announcing something she couldn't make out. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She clipped the leash onto Axel's collar. It was a simple, sturdy leash, nothing special. She wore clean but plain cargo pants and a simple t-shirt. Practical. Ready for anything. Axel leaned his weight gently against her leg, a steady pressure she had come to rely on. It meant, *I am here. You are safe. *. They walked towards the entrance. The difference was clear immediately. It was like stepping into a world where everyone knew a secret she didn't. The people around her moved with a fluttery, excited energy. Their dogs were glossy, poodles with elaborate, puffy haircuts that looked like clouds. Tiny dogs with bows in their hair, carried in sparkly bags. Big, fluffy dogs being brushed by their owners with intense focus. Elena and Axel moved through the crowd. Axel didn't pull or sniff. He walked in a perfect heel, his shoulder aligned with her knee, his eyes constantly scanning, not in fear, but in quiet assessment. This drew looks. Not looks of admiration, but looks of curiosity, and then subtle disapproval. She found the check-in table for her class. The woman behind the table had brightly dyed red hair and long painted nails. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Name?" she asked. "Elena Vance, for the Canine Companions class." The woman scanned her clipboard. "Ah, yes. And your dog's registered name?" Elena blinked. "His name is Axel." The woman's smile became a little tighter. "I mean his kennel name. His pedigree name." "He doesn't have one," Elena said, her voice even. "He's just Axel." A slight sigh. "Of course. Well, you're number 22. You'll be after the lovely Cockapoo." She handed Elena a numbered cloth to pin to her pants. It felt flimsy in her hand. As she turned to find her class's waiting area. A man holding the leash of a pristine white standard poodle stepped back, almost bumping into her. The poodle's hair was sculpted into perfect spheres. The man looked Axel up and down. His gaze took in Axel's working dog build, his alert posture, his direct gaze. "He's very focused," the man said, his tone light but with an edge. "The obedience and agility rings are on the far side of the grounds, you know." This area is more for the showcase events. Elena understood the meaning. You are in the wrong place. She met the man's eyes. We're in the right place, she said simply, and kept walking. She found a relatively quiet spot near a fence to wait. She knelt down beside Axel, running her hand over his head, feeling the familiar contours of his skull. He licked her wrist once. She focused on his breathing, using it to steady her own. She watched the other competitors in her class. A woman was practicing with her golden retriever, getting it to speak on command for a tiny treat. A man had his border collie jumping through a small hoop he made with his arms. Everyone was smiling, laughing, making a show of it. Elena's stomach sank. She had misunderstood. She thought companion meant partnership, trust, quiet understanding. But looking around, she realized this was about performance, about putting on a happy, entertaining show. Axel could do anything she asked with flawless precision. But his sit was a rock-solid, immediate action, not a bouncy trick. His focus was a deep, working focus, not a playful grin. A woman with a small, fluffy dog on a sequined leash walked by, glancing at Axel sitting so still. She leaned towards her friend, her voice carrying on the breeze. Some dogs just don't have the right temperament for this, you know? They look so stern. It's a bit intimidating. The words were like a physical touch, a cold poke. The old feeling of being out of place, of not fitting into the world she had returned to, washed over her. The noise of the crowd seemed to grow louder, pressing in. For a second, she considered just leaving, taking Axel and going back to their safe, quiet house. But then Axel shifted. He moved so he was sitting directly in front of her, blocking her view of the busy crowd, his back to everyone else. He looked up at her, his brown eyes calm and deep. He was giving her a buffer. He was doing his job. She took another deep breath. She had faced worse than a few judgmental strangers. She had signed up for this, and she would see it through. They would do their routine, simple as it was, and then they would go home. That was the mission. She pinned the number 22 to her pants, squared her shoulders, and waited for her call. The tightness in her chest was still there, but Axel's solid presence against her leg was stronger. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker, calling out number 22. It was their turn. Elena felt a jolt in her stomach, the same kind of quick, sharp feeling she used to get before heading out on a patrol. Not exactly fear, but a hyper-awareness. She looked down at Axel. He was already looking up at her, waiting for her signal. He knew. He always knew when it was time to work. "Okay, boy," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Let's just do our thing and go home." They walked towards the entrance of the show ring. It was a roped-off square of green grass in the middle of the main hall. Bright lights shone down from the ceiling, making everything feel exposed. Rows of folding chairs were filled with people watching. In the center stood the judge, the same older woman from check-in, holding a microphone and a clipboard. She had a kind enough face, but it was a face used to looking for sparkling teeth and wagging tails. Elena and Axel stepped onto the grass. The noise of the hall, the distant barking, the murmur of the crowd seemed to fade into a dull buzz. For Elena, the world narrowed to the edges of the ring and the dog at her side. This was a kind of space she understood. A clear objective. A defined area. This she could handle. The judge gave them a small, practiced smile. "And here we have competitor 22 with Axel. Are you ready?" Elena nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Begin when you are ready." Elena took a breath. She gave Axel a quiet, clear hand signal. He immediately sat at her left side, his body perfectly straight, his gaze fixed on her face. He didn't fidget. He didn't look around. He was a statue of focused attention. Good. the judge said into the microphone. Her voice echoed a little. Next, Elena gave the command for heel. She began to walk in a straight line. Axel moved with her, his shoulder perfectly in line with her leg. When she turned, he turned with a smooth military precision, keeping his position. There was no lag, no forging ahead. It was like they were connected by an invisible thread. This was basic stuff for them, the kind of thing they practiced every single day. For Axel, this wasn't a show. It was his purpose. From the crowd, she heard a few whispers. Not the usual happy chatter that had followed the bouncy cockapoo. This was different. It was curious, maybe even a little confused. She had Axel perform a stay. She walked a full 20 paces away, turned, and faced him. He remained utterly motionless, his eyes locked on her, his muscles coiled but perfectly still. Even when a loud crash came from a vendor dropping a metal bowl outside the ring, Axel's focus didn't break. His ear might have twitched, but that was all. He held the stay. For him, her command was stronger than any distraction. Finally, she called him to her. Not with a shout, but with a simple, soft word. Come. Axel moved. He didn't run. He didn't trot playfully. He came in a direct, powerful, and fast walk straight to her, sitting directly in front of her, looking up. Then, at another small signal, he swung around to resume his perfect heel position. It was over. Their whole routine had taken maybe 90 seconds. It was clean. It was flawless. It was utterly without frills. Elena stood at attention, waiting for the judge's comments. She felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the precision would be appreciated. Maybe they would see the work, the partnership. The judge lowered her microphone and walked over. She looked at Axel, then at Elena. Her kind face seemed a bit puzzled. She leaned in slightly. He is certainly very obedient, the judge said, her voice carrying a hint of something that wasn't quite praise. But dear, this is a showcase. We're looking for a bit of spirit, a bit of joy in the performance. It feels a little robotic. The word hit Elena like a physical thing. Robotic. It echoed in the space between her ears. She felt her face grow warm. She just nodded, unable to find any words. The judge raised her microphone again, her voice bright and public once more. Thank you for that very disciplined performance. A light, polite smattering of applause came from the crowd. It was the kind of applause you give when you don't know what else to do. It wasn't the warm, enthusiastic clapping that had followed the other dogs. Elena turned and led Axel out of the ring. The bright lights felt hot now. The path back through the crowd seemed longer. She kept her eyes forward, but she could feel the looks. She didn't see anger or dislike, just something worse, indifference. They were forgettable. Or worse, they were a curiosity that had already been dismissed. As they moved away from the main ring. A man nearby, holding a tiny dog with a ribbon in its hair, chuckled to his friend. I guess they forgot this wasn't a police dog trial, huh? The friend laughed softly. Elena didn't react. She just kept walking, her back straight, her hand tight on Axel's leash. She walked past the food stalls, past the barking dogs in their pens, past all the laughter and chatter that felt like it belonged to a different planet. She needed air. She needed quiet. She found a deserted bench at the very edge of the fairgrounds, tucked behind a large equipment shed. It was quiet here. You could still hear the distant noise of the event, but it was muffled. She sat down heavily, the fight going out of her posture. The embarrassment and frustration settled over her like a heavy coat. She had tried to step into a normal, happy world, and that world had gently but firmly pushed her back out. Axel didn't jump up on the bench. He didn't whine. He sat on the ground in front of her, his body blocking her from the view of anyone who might walk by. He rested his head on her knee. She placed a trembling hand on his broad head, feeling the familiar softness of his fur behind his ears. "It's okay," she whispered to him, or maybe to herself. "You did everything perfectly. It's me. I don't know how to do this stuff." Axel just let out a long, quiet sigh, his warm breath on her leg. He was on duty. His job right now wasn't to perform. It was to be right here, in the quiet behind the shed, with the sounds of a world that didn't understand them floating in the distance. They sat together. She was defeated. He was steadfast. And for now, that was all that mattered. She wasn't sure how long they sat there on that quiet bench. Time had a way of slipping sometimes, especially when she was trying to steady the storm inside her own head. The muffled sounds of the dog showcase were a constant happy hum that felt like it was coming from another country. She focused on the solid weight of Axel's head on her knee, the steady rhythm of his breathing. This was real. This was her ground. That part of her wanted to just get up, walk to the car, and drive away. Leave the glittery leashes and the critical comments behind. But another part, a smaller, stubborn part, refused. Leaving felt too much like running away. She had faced real enemies, real fear. She wouldn't run from a county fair. So she decided they would stay, at least for a little while. They would just be spectators. They could watch the other events from a distance, then leave with their heads held high. It was a compromise. She stood up, her legs a little stiff. "Come on, boy. Let's just take a walk. No more performing." Axel stood with her, instantly alert. They walked slowly around the perimeter of the fairgrounds, giving the busy main areas a wide berth. They watched the agility dogs from far away, leaping over hurdles and weaving through poles with joyful speed. It was beautiful, in a way. But it wasn't them. They found themselves near the food vendors. The smell of popcorn and frying oil filled the air. It was busy here, with families laughing and children clutching balloons and giant pretzels. Elena kept close to the fence line, trying to be invisible in the crowd. Axel stayed in his perfect heel, his body a calm buffer. Between her and the passing chaos dot, she saw a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, holding a bright red balloon. He was dancing around his mother's legs, full of that endless energy children seem to have. The mother was trying to order food from a vendor, distracted. The scene was normal. Safe. Elena allowed herself a small breath. This was okay. She could observe normal life without having to participate in it. She leaned against a fence post, and Axel sat down, his watchful eyes scanning the area not with anxiety, but with a quiet, professional assessment. This was what he did. He assessed. Then, a few things happened at once, so fast that later, Elena would only remember them in flashes. The little boy's balloon slipped from his fingers. A gust of wind caught it, bouncing it playfully towards the back of the food vendor's tent. The boy squealed with delight and scampered after it, ducking under the corner of the tent fabric. His mother, her back turned, hadn't seen Dot at the same moment. The food vendor, a man looking rushed and hot, stumbled backwards with a large, full bag of ice. He wasn't looking behind him. His heel connected hard with one of the 2 large, heavy propane cylinders that powered his cooking grills. The cylinders were supposed to be securely strapped to the metal frame of the tent. One of the straps was old. It was frayed. The kick from the vendor's heel was the final straw. With a sound that was more of a deep snap than a pop, the frayed strap gave way. Elena saw it in a frozen slice of time. The heavy, metallic cylinder, taller than the little boy, began to tip. It was falling sideways, gaining momentum, directly towards the back of the tent where the child had just disappeared. The mother was still turned away. The vendor was setting down his bag of ice, unaware. The crowd flowed past, blind to the silent disaster tilting into motion In that same frozen second, she felt Axel disappear from her side. It wasn't a movement she commanded. It wasn't even a movement she fully saw at first. It was a sudden absence of his warmth, followed by a blur of black and tan streaking across the gravel. Every bit of Axel's disciplined training, every instinct bred into him for generations, focused into a single silent purpose. He did not bark a warning. Barking took time. He moved with a speed that made the happy, slow-motion world of the fair seem to stand still. He went straight for the child. He didn't bite or grab. Just as the boy was bending to pick up his balloon, Axel's solid body slammed into him, a powerful, deliberate push. It was not a gentle nudge. It was a life-saving shove. The boy tumbled backwards onto the soft grass, out of the shadow of the tent. His balloon floating away forgotten. Axel did not stop. His momentum carried him forward. The heavy cylinder was halfway through its fall, a deadly arc of metal heading for the ground where the boy had just been. Axel planted his feet. He turned his shoulder into the falling cylinder, not to stop it. That was impossible, but to change its path. A hollow, metallic boom shook the air as the cylinder hit the ground. But it didn't land flat. Axel's intervention had shoved it off its course. It landed on its curved side with that terrible, ringing crash, then rolled away from the tent, away from the grass where the boy now sat. Stunned clattering to a stop harmlessly against a metal trash cannot the world, which had seemed so loud a moment before, went completely silent. Then, sound rushed back in. A woman's scream. The mother. She had turned and seen her son on the ground, and the massive cylinder rolling away. She screamed and ran to him, scooping him into her arms. The food vendor stood, pale as paper, staring at the broken strap and his fallen propane tank. The crowd in the immediate area had jumped back, a ring of shocked faces now forming a circle around the scene. And in the center of it all was Axel. He was standing now, panting lightly. He looked at the cylinder, then at the crying boy in his mother's arms. He took a few steps back, his job done. Then, as if following an invisible wire, he turned his head and looked straight across the distance at Elena. Alana's own body unfroze. Her military training kicked in before her panic could. She was moving while everyone else was still gasping. She didn't run to Axel first. She ran to the epicenter of the crisis. She knelt beside the sobbing mother and the frightened boy. "Are you hurt? Look at me, buddy. Does anything hurt?" Her voice was calm, clear, and commanding. It was a voice from her past, a voice for managing chaos. The boy, his eyes wide with shock, shook his head no. He was scared, crying from the fright, but he was moving his arms and legs. He was okay. The mother looked at Elena, her face streaked with tears. The dog. He pushed him. He saved him, Elena said, her voice softer now. She looked over at the toppled cylinder, then back at the vendor. "You need to secure that, now." The vendor just nodded, still in shock. Finally, Elena stood up. Her legs felt weak. The adrenaline was starting to shake through her. She looked at Axel. He was sitting now, perfectly calm, waiting for her. His gaze was steady. The quiet was breaking apart into a buzz of excited, horrified chatter. And every single person in that buzzing crowd was now looking, not at the fancy show rings, but at the simple, powerful German shepherd and the woman in plain clothes walking towards him. The judge with the microphone was there, her hand over her mouth, her clipboard hanging forgotten at her side. The man with the perfect poodle was staring, his mouth slightly open. The woman who had called Axel intimidating was watching, her hands clasped to her chest. Elena reached Axel. She didn't hug him or make a fuss. She just put a firm, steadying hand on his head, her fingers digging into the thick fur of his neck. He leaned into her touch. No one clapped. Not yet. The moment was too big, too real for applause. It was filled with the shaky aftermath of fear, the dizzying relief of a disaster avoided. The showcase of glitter and obedience was gone. All that was left was the truth of what had just happened on the dusty ground near the food tents. The silence after the crash didn't last long. It was broken by the sound of the little boy's cries, turning from shock to confusion, and his mother's frantic, grateful sobs as she rocked him. But the wider circle of people stayed quiet, just staring. The scene held them frozen. The shiny, happy world of the dog showcase had just been cracked open by something raw and real. Elena kept her hand on Axel's head. She could feel the strong beat of his heart through her fingertips, a fast rhythm that was slowly calming. Her own heart was pounding in her ears. The part of her that was a soldier was already doing the after-action report. Asterisk child secure. Threat neutralized. No casualties. Asterisk the part of her that was just a woman, tired and out of place, felt wobbly and exposed under all these staring eyes. The food vendor finally moved, his face pale. He rushed over to the fallen propane cylinder, checking the valve with trembling hands. It's closed, he muttered to anyone listening, more to reassure himself. It didn't leak. Oh, thank God. His words seemed to break the spell. The judge, the woman who had called Axel's performance robotic, was the first to step forward. She didn't walk with her earlier official grace. She moved carefully, as if stepping onto holy ground. She stopped a few feet from Elena and Axel, her eyes wide. She started, her voice shaky. She looked from Axel's calm, panting face to the boy in his mother's arms, and back to Elena. I saw it. I saw the whole thing. That dog. He knew. He knew before any of us. Elena just nodded. She didn't know what to say. He's trained to notice things, she said finally, her own voice sounding rough. Trained? The judge said, a new kind of understanding dawning on her face. That wasn't training. That was something else. The mother, still kneeling on the grass, looked up. Her eyes were red, but the panic was fading, replaced by a dazed gratitude. She looked straight at Elena. He saved my boy. Your dog saved him. She hugged her son tighter. The tank. It was falling right where he was standing. He was chasing his balloon. Her voice broke again. The little boy, his cries softening to sniffles, peeked out from his mother's shoulder. He looked at Axel. Axel, sensing the attention, turned his head slightly. He didn't move towards the child. He just looked, his ears up, his expression calm. Is he a police dog? Someone in the crowd asked. Elena shook her head. No, he's just my dog. But that wasn't true, and everyone could feel it. He wasn't just anything. The man with the perfectly groomed poodle had come closer. He wasn't smiling as earlier, knowing smile. He looked serious, even ashamed. He looked at the simple, sturdy leash in Elena's hand, at her practical clothes, and then at Axel's powerful, capable frame. I owe you an apology, the man said, his voice low. Earlier, I said. Well, it doesn't matter what I said. I was wrong. This, he gestured to the scene, this is what a real dog is for. Not prancing in a circle. His words hung in the air. Other people began to murmur in agreement. The whispers weren't critical anymore. They were awed. Did you see how fast he was? He didn't even make a sound. He pushed the boy out of the way and then hit the tank. The judge seemed to gather herself. She looked at Elena with a new, deep respect. Ma'am, what is your name? And your dog's name? Elena, and this is Axel. The judge nodded, as if committing it to memory. Then she did something unexpected. She turned to the growing crowd and raised her voice. It wasn't her polished microphone voice. It was a real voice, filled with emotion. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" People turned from the food vendor, who was now securing the other cylinder with thick new straps. The judge waited until it was quiet. "Most of you know me. I judge dogs. I look for beauty, for spirit, for obedience. Today, I saw all of those things. But a few minutes ago, I saw something more important. I saw courage. I saw intelligence. I saw a dog who understood danger and acted without a single command to save a child's life." She pointed towards Axel, who was now sitting squarely, leaning against Elena's leg. "This dog, Axel, and his handler Elena were in my ring earlier. I made a comment about their performance. I said it seemed robotic. I was wrong. What I was seeing wasn't a lack of spirit. It was a profound focus. It was a readiness. And it was that focus, that readiness, that saved a little boy today." Elena felt the heat rise to her cheeks. This was too much attention. She wanted to shrink away. But Axel's solid weight against her leg held her there. Not the judge continued. "We give out ribbons here for best in show, for best coat, for best performance. But today, I think we've all seen the true best in show. It's not about how a dog looks in a ring. It's about what's in here." She tapped her chest over her heart. "And I believe we've just witnessed it." Then someone started to clap. It was the mother, still sitting on the grass, one hand patting her son's back, the other hand clapping slowly, tears streaming down her face. It was like a signal. The clapping spread. It started soft, then grew. It wasn't the polite, short applause from the show ring. This was loud. It was sustained. People were nodding. Some were wiping their own eyes. The man with the poodle clapped firmly. The vendor, his task done, joined in, his face serious. They were clapping for Axel, but they were also clapping for her. Elena could see it in their faces now. The earlier looks of indifference or curiosity were gone. They saw her now. They saw the partnership. They understood, in a way they hadn't before, that this woman and this dog were a team in the deepest sense. The little boy wiggled out of his mother's arms. He took a few wobbly steps toward Axel. Elena gave a subtle signal, and Axel lowered his head, making himself smaller, less intimidating. The boy stopped right in front of him, his little hand reaching out. He didn't pet Axel's head, just touched his chest once. Gently. "Thank you," the boy whispered. Axel's tail gave one single, quiet thump on the ground. In that moment, standing in the middle of a crowd that finally understood, with her dog, her partner, her anchor calm at her side, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt, just for a moment, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The shame from earlier was gone, washed away by something far more powerful than any judge's opinion. It was replaced by a quiet, solid pride, not for herself, but for the incredible animal beside her, and for the unbreakable bond they shared. The showcase was over. The real meaning of their day had just been revealed. The applause finally began to soften, fading into a buzz of excited conversation. But the crowd didn't part. People stayed, forming a loose circle around Elena and Axel, not crowding them, but not wanting to walk away either. They had just witnessed something that felt more important than any competition. And it had changed the whole feeling of the day. The judge walked over, her clipboard now tucked under her arm like an afterthought. "Elena," she said, her voice much kinder now, "would you and Axel come with me for a moment? There's something I'd like to do." Elena hesitated. All she really wanted was to go home, to process the whirlwind of the last 10 minutes in the quiet of her own space. But the judge's eyes were earnest. Axel looked up at her, waiting for her decision. He was calm, ready to follow her lead, as always. "Okay," Elena said, her voice a little rough. "Just for a minute." They followed the judge back towards the main showcase ring, but it felt like a different place now. People stopped talking as they passed, not staring with judgment, but with a new kind of respect. Some smiled. A few gave small, encouraging nods. The man with the poodle actually said, "Amazing dog. Truly amazing." They reached the edge of the main ring. The next event had been paused. The announcer on the loudspeaker had clearly heard what happened, because the usual cheerful background music was off. There was a quiet hum of expectation in the air. The judge stepped into the center of the ring and motioned for the announcer. She took the microphone. Her voice, amplified, rang out clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, competitors and guests, if I can have your attention for one last special announcement." The remaining crowds in the bleachers and around the ring turned to look. As many of you now know, there was an incident near the food vendors a short while ago. A potentially very serious accident was prevented, entirely due to the quick thinking and incredible action of a dog and handler who are here with us today. All eyes swung to Elena, standing at the entrance of the ring with Axel. She felt a flush of heat, but it was different from the hot shame of earlier. This was the heat of being seen, truly seen, and it was overwhelming. The judge continued, "Today, we've awarded ribbons for beauty, for skill, for obedience in a controlled setting. But sometimes, life reminds us of what truly matters. It reminds us that the bond between a person and their dog can be about more than show. It can be about loyalty. It can be about courage. It can be about a silent understanding that puts the safety of others first." She paused, looking directly at Elena and Axel. "Elena and Axel, would you please join me?" Elena's feet felt rooted to the ground. Axel nudged her hand with his nose. It was a small push, a reminder. "We can do this." She took a deep breath and walked into the ring, Axel moving in his perfect, calm heel beside her. The grass under her feet felt the same, but everything else was different. The judge reached into her pocket and pulled out a large, deep blue ribbon. It wasn't like the others. It was wider, and instead of saying first place or best in show, someone had quickly written on it in bold, silver letters, "True Hero. This isn't an official category," the judge said into the microphone, her voice thick with emotion. "But after what we all witnessed, it's the only one that fits. On behalf of everyone here, and especially on behalf of a certain little boy and his mother, we want to honor you both." She walked over and gently pinned the blue ribbon to the simple leash in Elena's hand. Then she bent down and looked at Axel. "And for you, brave one," she said softly. She produced a brand new large dog toy, a sturdy braided rope, and placed it on the ground in front of him. Axel glanced at Elena. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Only then did he lean forward, carefully taking the toy in his mouth, holding it proudly. This time, the applause that erupted was thunderous. It filled the big hall, echoing off the rafters. People stood up from the bleachers. They whistled. They cheered. It was loud and full of real feeling. The little boy, now sitting on his father's shoulders near the front, clapped his small hands together with a big grin. Elena looked out at the cheering crowd. She saw the mother, who mouthed the words, "Thank you," again, her hand over her heart. She saw the other competitors, the ones with the fancy dogs and sparkly leads, applauding without a trace of their earlier condescension. In their faces, she saw something that looked like humility and a new understanding. She didn't raise a hand or wave. She just stood there, with her dog, accepting the moment. The noise, which would have sent her into a panic just an hour before, felt different now. It wasn't a chaotic threat. It was a wave of gratitude, and she let it wash over her without breaking. When the applause finally began to die down, she gave the judge a nod of thanks. Then, without a word, she turned and walked with Axel out of the ring. This time, as they made their way through the fairgrounds towards the exit, people didn't just get out of their way. They smiled. They made space. A young girl reached out tentatively, and Axel, still carrying his new toy, allowed her to briefly touch his back. They reached the quiet of the parking lot. The late afternoon sun was warm. Elena opened the back door of her car, and Axel jumped in, settling onto his blanket, still holding the braided rope. She got into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine right away. She just sat for a minute in the silence, looking at the blue ribbon pinned to his leash, which she had placed on the passenger seat. She looked in the rearview mirror. Axel met her gaze, his eyes calm, his new toy resting between his big paws. "Good boy." "Axel," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Good boy." He let out a long content sigh, as if to say, we did our job. Now we can go home. As she drove away from the fairgrounds, the tightness that had been in her chest all day was gone. It wasn't about winning a ribbon. The blue ribbon was nice, but it was just a piece of fabric. What she was taking home was something much heavier and much better. She was taking home the memory of a child's safe smile. She was taking home the newfound strength that came from being understood. Even for just a moment, she was taking home the unshakable proof that the quiet, disciplined bond she shared with Axel, a bond forged in patience and silent understanding, was not something to be hidden or ashamed of. It was powerful. It was meaningful. It was, in its own way, beautiful. She reached back and put her hand through the gap in the seats. Axel leaned his head against her palm, his tail giving a soft thump against the car seat. They didn't need a showcase. They had everything they needed right there in that simple, trusting touch. They were a team. And finally, the whole world had seen it.